No te veo cómo tú estás, cómo tú apareces. Diana, ya, continuamos. Rafael, presenta a Rafael.
Sí.
Cedo la palabra al profesor Rafael Sánchez para que nos pueda presentar al conferencista.
Sí, muy buenas tardes. Es para mí un placer presentar al doctor Mogens. Él es profesor emérito de matemáticas y educación matemática de la Universidad Roskilde en Dinamarca, y su formación es como matemático graduado en la Universidad de Copenhague. Tiene un doctorado honorario en la Universidad de Umeå, Suecia, y es miembro inaugural de la American Mathematical Society. En el año 2003 se convirtió en caballero de la Orden de la Bandera Danesa y fue ascendido a primer rango en 2016. Ha estado profundamente relacionado con la Comisión Internacional sobre la Enseñanza de las Matemáticas, especialmente como secretario general del ICNI de 1991 a 1998. Y como miembro del grupo de expertos en matemáticas de la Organización para la Cooperación y Desarrollo Económico, OCDE-PISA, de 1998 a 2002. Actualmente es miembro del Comité de Educación de la Sociedad Matemática Europea. Ha sido miembro o presidente de un gran número de comités nacionales e internacionales. El principal campo de su investigación radica en la educación matemática, con alrededor de 170 publicaciones. Sus intereses de investigación se centran en el problema de la justificación de la educación matemática, aplicaciones y modelados de la enseñanza y aprendizaje de las matemáticas y su evaluación, la naturaleza de la investigación en educación matemática como disciplina científica, competencias matemáticas en educación matemática y más recientemente sobre dificultades de aprendizaje en matemáticas. Con esto cedo la palabra al doctor Mogens. Dr. Niss, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. I will see if I can make the share screen work. Thank you very much for your invitation. Muchas gracias por su invitación. I am going to speak about something which is very dear to me and is becoming increasingly dear to me over the last several decades: the role of theory in mathematics education research. What does it actually mean? What is theory and what is its role? Let me begin by offering a very well-known statement. Many people have quoted it over the years. It comes from the psychologist Kurt Lewin, who in 1943 said the following: "There is nothing as practical as a good theory." I think in the context of this conference and in the context of this talk, it should also be mentioned that there is nothing as damaging as the impact of ill-defined or inadequate theories. So an overview of what I'm going to talk about is the following. So first I will give an introduction. Then I will discuss the issue of definitions of theory. So you will see that there is a question mark and there is also an exclamation mark, and that reflects the state of the art. So what are theories for? So what are, I mean, in general. So, and then what are theories and their cognates in mathematics education research? what are their roles in actual mathematics education research if we look at how it is being conducted, and then the conclusion. So as for the introduction, so theoretical issues have gained increasing attention in mathematics education research throughout at least the last 2 decades. In fact, probably more. This is reflected in a lot of publications. So, for instance, in the famous second handbook by Frank Lester, there were 3, or in fact more, chapters that dealt with the notion of theory. The ZDM, the International Journal of Mathematics Education, has published 3 special issues in 2005-06 and in 2008 about theory. The ICME 11 that took place in Monterrey in Mexico in 2008 had a survey team on theories in mathematics education. And rather recently, another book has been published by Sri Raman in English, Theories of Mathematics Education. It's a thick book, you can see. So, of course, the notion of theory is essential in any scholarly and scientific discipline, of course, including mathematics education research, where the term is encountered more and more often. Eventually, what we want to establish in any scientific domain and discipline will be a set of solid, well-founded, and useful theories. Not only the notion of theory, but also its different cognates, the related terms, are gaining increasing importance in mathematics education research, such as theoretical framework, theoretical construct, conceptual framework, theoretical perspective, theoretical approach, etc. Yet it's not clear at all what theory and its cognates actually mean in relation to mathematics education. This is problematic. It's also striking. So if theory is really going to be a centerpiece of what our endeavors are about, to create theories and construct them and use them, then it is problematic, I would venture, that it's not clear at all what this means. It's also not clear what their cognates, what the cognates mean, and not where do the theories come from. How are they developed? And what are their foundations? This is problematic as well. If we look at publications in mathematics education research and about mathematics education research, it is striking that definitions of these notions are typically absent or very vague. What is the reason for this? Well, the main reason, I think, is that it was always the case that the general notion of theory, not just in mathematics education and mathematics education research, but in general, that the notion of theory was always multi-valued and therefore ambiguous. So let us consult, as we often do, some dictionaries and encyclopedias. Well, the word derives from Greek. Theoria means consideration, speculation, and it derives from the word theorein, to consider. Let us consult a couple of dictionaries. So there's one here, the Collins Cobuild English Dictionary speaks about 4 different meanings of theory. I would quote these meanings. A theory is a formal idea or set of ideas that is intended to explain something. This is one meaning. Another meaning is that if you have a theory about something, you have your own opinion about it, which you cannot prove, but which you nevertheless think is true. You can also have such a thing as the theory of a practical skill or subject. And their theory typically means the set of rules and principles that form the basis of that practical subject or those skills. And the fourth meaning is to say that you use the term theory to say that although something is supposed to be true or to happen in the way stated, it may not in fact be true or happen that way. So this is one set of rather different definitions or characterizations coming from a well-known English dictionary. Let's consult another one. We could consult hundreds of them, but let's nevertheless constrain ourselves to just a little. So the word reference, which come from Princeton, offers 3 different kinds of meanings. So they speak about a tentative theory about the natural world, a concept that is not yet verified, but that if it were true, would explain certain facts or phenomena. The second meaning is that a theory is a belief that can guide behavior, which this corresponds somewhat to the one in the Collins Code, where you think something is true, but you can also use it for guiding your activities. The final meaning in the word reference is that a theory is a well-substantiated explanation of some aspects of the natural world, an organized system of accepted knowledge that applies in a variety of circumstances to explain a specific set of phenomena. So these meanings are very different. They are, in a way, collected in 3 categories. It can be a hypothesis that cannot be or has not yet been substantiated. It could be some beliefs, rules, or principles that you put in practice to guide your practice or behavior. And it can also be a more or less connected edifice of claims intended to explain phenomena. We might also add that a theory can also be a set of ideas and offer a vocabulary that shape the discourse in the field. All these meanings can be found in mathematics education research. However, they are mostly implicit. So this raises the question of, do we need definitions? It's again also to me rather striking to see that only a very few researchers offer definitions of what they mean by theory and its cognate terms, even though they use it repeatedly. So, for example, the very influential and wonderful chapter in the handbook by Frank Lester, written by Patricia Herbst and Ed Silver, about theory in mathematics education scholarship, deliberately abstained from providing a definition. I've had an opportunity to talk to the editor and others involved in this, that they deliberately did not want to offer a definition. So what Patricia Herbst and Ed Silver do is that they perceive theory as a mediator between 3 things, between research, problems, and practices. But there are something out there that may touch upon the idea of definition. So Susanne Prediger from Germany and Angelika Wigner-Aspas from Germany as well, and Ferdinando Azzarello from Italy have written in one of the ZDM special issues about theory that there is a reason to distinguish between static and dynamic notions of theory. And they plead for a dynamic understanding, and they say, since the theories or theoretical approaches are constructions in the state of flux. However, they do think that there is a core of empirical components and its application area. And the core includes basic foundations, assumptions, and norms, which are taken for granted in the context. So I would like to make my comment here that it's absolutely true that theories and theoretical approaches and theoretical frameworks are in a state of flux. But that does not necessarily mean that the definitions should be in a state of flux as well. So if we look into mathematics education publications, there will be some examples of definitions that John Mason and Andrew Hayward in 1996 suggested that theories encompass objectives, they encompass objects, methods, situations, and the language for discussing these. Louis Radford suggests, again in one of the ZDM papers, special issues, so I suggest that a theory can be seen as a way of producing understandings and ways of action based on a system P of basic principles, a methodology that he calls M, and a set Q of paradigmatic research questions. In the IGME study for Monterey, IGME in Monterey in 2011, Therese Assud and others suggested that we should adopt two views of theory in mathematics education research. The first view is a structural view. And from the structural point of view, a theory is an organized and coherent system of concepts and notions. But there is also a functional point of view. What is a theory used for? Well, a theory is a system of tools that permit a speculation about some reality. Jian Fakai, who is with us, luckily, in this conference, and was the editor-in-chief in Journal for Research in Mathematics Education, together with his editorial colleagues, in 2019, put out a very important editorial where they looked at theoretical frameworks. So they said the following: in this editorial, we use the term theoretical framework broadly to encompass the set of assumptions, theories, hypotheses, and claims, as well as the relationships between them that guide a researcher thinking about the phenomenon being studied. So if we look at this, so a theoretical framework encompasses certain things, including theories. So theory is one component of a theoretical framework. There are other components as well. So theoretical framework contains theories according to this. So to sum up, there is a diversity of ways in which mathematics education researchers make use of notions related to theory or theoretical. That is indeed, I think, a very woolly situation. Of course, we should never forget a statement made many years ago by the Polish-American mathematician, probability theorist, Mark Katz, who said, "I cannot define my wife, but I can recognize her when I see her." And of course, that is also a very important memento for us, that we, even though we may strive at definitions in a theoretical and a scientific domain, it is not that easy. But if we refuse to offer definitions of these notions, we end up taking them for granted. And that means that it will be our own private understanding that guides our thinking. And eventually we will not know what we are talking about in our discourses with others. So I actually claim that we do need definitions. I'm not pleading for particular definitions, particular given definitions, but for some definitions, so that we can discuss what we are talking about when we are invoking theories and theoretical constructs. So here is what I would call a minimalist definition of definition. Any definition must include the following. A theory is a theory of something. It deals with sorts of objects and phenomena, and it also includes terms for these, but it is about something. It's not just something that lives in the free air. It is also a characteristic of any reasonable definition of theory that it must produce corroborated claims about these objects and phenomena, typically in response to questions posed as driving the theoretical work and the empirical work. These claims produced by a theory have to be generated by some means, and these means have to rely on some grounds. So this is what I would call a minimalist definition. Any reasonable characterization of theory must include at least those components. So that means that specifying a theory or a theoretical framework or a construct and all these other cognates then amounts to specifying at least the following thing. What are the objects and phenomena we are looking at? And what are the corresponding terms we want to use about these objects and phenomena that are supposed to be covered by the construct? So what is the nature of the questions that are posed and the claims produced? And what are the ways in which the claims are supposed to be obtained? So specifying a theory requires us to indicate at least this. I have a slightly more demanding definition of theory. I'm not suggesting that everyone should buy into that definition, but nevertheless, I would like to offer it. It reflects the fact that I was trained as a research mathematician, and that the notion of theory that we use in mathematics will then have an impact on this definition. So To me, a theory is an organized network of concepts and claims. And the claims will often be taken as answers to questions about some extensive domain of objects and phenomena. The concepts in the theory are linked in a hierarchy in which some of the concepts taken as basic form the core of the hierarchy, and the other concepts are defined in terms of these concepts. The claims in the system are either basic assumptions or actions. We cannot prove everything, as we know. We must sometimes take something for granted, and these basic claims are then fundamental. The other claims we obtain are derivations, formal or material derivations on the basis of these claims. As we know, there is no such thing as correct definitions, only expedient definitions, supposed to suit certain purposes. So no definition is right or wrong. It can be conducive to certain things and not to others, etc. So discussing whether a definition is a good or bad definition amounts to discussing whether or not it is expedient for our purposes. So I'm not suggesting that we agree on a monolithic, uniform set of definitions of theory and its cognates, only that we state our definitions as prerequisites to our discourses. So what are theories yet? Well, theories are... there was some intervention, I'm afraid. Okay, so what are theories for? So I think it's possible to identify 6 purposes of theories. The most important from a scientific perspective and from constructing a domain and a discipline is that theories are here to provide explanations of observed facts and phenomena within the domain covered by the theory. What does it mean to explain a phenomenon? Well, that means to establish its occurrence as a claim in the theory under certain conditions, provided certain conditions are fulfilled. What does it mean to, another purpose is to provide predictions, the predictions of the possible occurrence of phenomena. And again, prediction means to establish occurrences as a possible claim in the theory and specifying the conditions under which these claims are valid. And thus, buying into what has already been said from our dictionaries, theories also are here to provide guidance for action or behavior. What does that mean? Well, that means that we employ knowledge of claims in the theory to achieve desirable outcomes or to avoid undesirable outcomes of actions or
Rafael. Ya, doctor, usted puede.
¿Qué pasó? Está silenciado, ¿eh? Ahora otra vez.
Okay. Am I back on track?
Microphone.
Okay.
Yes, Mogens.
Okay, thank you. So the purpose of the theory is also to provide a structured set of lenses through which parts of the aspects of the world that we're looking at can be approached and observed and investigated or analyzed. Actually, when we look in the ways theories are being used in mathematics education research, this is one of the more widespread uses to provide a structured set of lenses through which we can observe aspects of the world. But what does this amount to? Well, this amounts to selecting the elements we want to consider, to focus on specific features and issues, and to adopt particular perspectives and identify suitable methodologies. Another important thing, which perhaps is particularly important in our field, is it also serves the purpose of providing a safeguard against unscientific approaches or procedures. As I think I indicated in the panel the other day, in the past, it was not unusual that people in mathematics education, in the didactics of mathematics, came up with all sorts of ideas and claims and statements and wishes, which would not really serve the purpose of attributing to our field as an academic field. So we have to avoid haphazard and inconsistent choices when it comes to terminology, research methodology, as well as inference and interpretations of our results. So this means that we have to make the assumptions and choices we make explicit, excuse me, that we situate our work in a larger context, and that we are able and willing to describe its nature, strength, and limitations. We have to admit that mathematics education as a research domain is sometimes being attacked from other fields, classically from mathematicians who think this is supposed to be scientific. You are just having opinions, and I have another opinion, so why is that not as good as yours? And we're also having skeptical or hostile comments coming from other disciplines outside of mathematics, say, for instance, psychology and the educational sciences. So one of the roles of theory is to help us to protect ourselves against such attacks. So what are then the theories and their cognates in mathematics education research? So let's zoom in a little bit on that. So in the book, the Sri Ramanan English book, they ask the question, is there such a thing as theory in mathematics education? Well, in the same book, Jeremy Kilpatrick, a very fantastic colleague, said the following: to say that something is a theory in mathematics education, rather than say an approach, theoretical framework, theoretical perspective, or model, is to make an exceedingly strong claim. I'm happy to talk about theorizing, adopting a theoretical stance, or employing a theoretical framework, but I do not see extant theoretical constructions as warranting the label of theory. So in Jeremy's view, there is no such thing that deserves to be labeled a theory, yet they abound. So what can we make of that? Frank Lester, in a different paper, said that I argue that the role of theory should be determined in light of the research framework that one has adopted. And the research framework is the basic structure of the ideas, that is the abstractions and relationships that serve as the basis for a phenomenon that is to be investigated. So for Frank Lester, first comes the phenomenon to be studied. Then comes the research framework by which we can study this phenomenon. And only then comes, perhaps, the theory. As I said, a theory is about something. I think there are, when we look closer into what we are encountering in the field, there are three kinds of theories, kinds of theory, I should say. There are theories that are about mathematics education as an object. So they deal with the aspects of teaching and learning of mathematics. Not teaching and learning in general, teaching and learning of mathematics, including the social, cultural, and political environments of these components. So this environment that Juan Godino and Carmen Batonero call the ecological surroundings of the theory. But then there are also theories in or for mathematics education. These are the ones that are being used by mathematics education researchers in framing and undertaking their investigations, and in analyzing and accounting for their findings. So these are, in a way, methodologically oriented theories. What can we use when we do our research? These are not theories about necessarily, not necessarily theories about mathematics education as an object, but they are can be theories about some of the components, and they can be borrowed from elsewhere, which I will return to. And then the last category of theories actually deal with mathematics education research as an object, mathematics education perceived as a discipline. So how can we perceive a mathematics education as a discipline, as an object for theories? There are theories about that. So I've made a number of observations here. So the first, which I've already indicated, is that theory is gaining increasing importance in mathematics education research, which is reflected in the fact that fewer and fewer publications abstain from invoking theory. This was very, very different 30 years ago. Well, most of the papers would not dream of indicating anything of a theory. The other observation is that there is no such thing as a well-established unified theory of any of the three kinds I just mentioned. Instead, there is increasing diversity. In a paper in the Sri Raman and English book, Steve Lerman asks, is plurality a problem? Plurality of theory is a problem. And he answers, no, it's not a problem, as long as we know how we can work with this plurality. The third observation is that when we focus in on theories of about or in for mathematics education, they tend to be borrowed from other fields. Although this is oftentimes happening in a rather eclectic and superficial and sometimes vague way. We have to observe that when we borrow theories from other disciplines, they cannot deal specifically with mathematics education. So they can never exhaustively deal with the object we want to look at when we work with mathematics education. The fourth observation is that we are now witnessing a marked, slow, but nevertheless marked movement from borrowing theory borrowing towards theory building, as Lesh Raman and English wrote in an entry in the Encyclopedia of Mathematics Education. So we are gradually moving towards theory building, and sometimes theory building in mathematics education has been called homegrown. So we are trying to make homegrown theories. This does not imply that we cannot borrow things from outside while doing this homegrowing in the same way as we will buy fertilizers and instruments and all sorts of things when we do farming. But nevertheless, the object is to produce vegetables or fruits and what have we. The fifth and last observation I want to make is that in the past, we saw fights between different theoretical positions. Piagetian researchers discussed with the activity theorists about which was the right way to conceptualize students' learning, etc. But now we are rather moving towards what Grafemeyer and Paul Cobb and others call bricolage, when we go and pick and pickle what we can use for our purposes. And the newer attempt here is to, in a consequence of using the plurality of theories, is the so-called networking of theories, which have been advocated and executed by Tommy Dreyfus, Susanne Prediger, and others. So bringing theories together, that of course raises questions of how this can be done. So, but what are then the theories borrowed from other fields? There are lots of them. There are many theories are about the epistemology and sociology of mathematics as a discipline. So where mathematics is the object, not mathematics education, not mathematics learning and teaching, but mathematics as an object. So what is its epistemology and its sociology? And that has consequences, of course, for the things we do in mathematics education research. For a long time, we have been using statistics and psychometrics, in particular in guiding quantitative studies in mathematics education, which in the past in particular abounded in the numbers. And it is coming back now, because we are now seeing a turn that we want a generalizability in our theories, and that often calls for involvement of statistics and psychometrics. Of course, there is an invocation of general philosophical theories, in particular theories about epistemology. I can just mention the people mentioned here: Kant, Peirce, Bachelard, Wittgenstein, Popper, Lakatos from Larsfeld, where we try to make use of offers and offerings from those general philosophical theories. General psychological theories, especially about cognition and learning. And there's no reason for me to mention all these. There are lots of them. In relatively recent times, we are also beginning to use neuroscience, that is, psychophysiological theories about the organization of the brain and the mind. I can just mention the Lakoff and Nunez work, but more and more people are beginning now to use neuroscience in empirical investigations on what happens in students' minds when they work on mathematical problems, for example. We make use of general theories of education and pedagogy, in particular about curriculum and teaching. Let me mention one which is now becoming more and more important, the variation theory introduced by Ferenc Martin from Gothenburg and Booth from Hong Kong, where we can use variation as a means of zooming in on what it is that students should try to learn. Linguistic theories of all kinds, in particular linguistic theories that pertain to the languages, the language in mathematics and its relationship with everyday language. There are lots of linguistic theories that come into play here. And last but not least, since mathematics education takes place in institutions and takes place under surroundings that are of a sociological and societal nature, it's no wonder that we borrow a lot of theories from the social sciences, all of them, as a matter of fact, sociology, political science, anthropology, qualitative studies, gender studies, minority studies, critical theory, hermeneutics, etc. But borrowing theories from other fields and putting them to use in mathematics education research necessarily, I have written typically, but I would even say necessarily requires interpretation, modification, adaptation, and combination, because these theories do not in and of themselves deal with mathematics education. Now, there are specific theories about and for mathematics education research. Or perhaps I should say that there are not only theories, but also germs. So there's a falling out of things from time to time. Am I on still? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So there are not only theories, there are also germs of theories about mathematics education, and they are the ones that predominate. There are not really many grand theories. There are not many that dare propose a complete theory of mathematics education. There are some, but not many. So instead, there are what other people have termed local theories and medium-level theories. So let me just mention a few. The theory of conceptual fields by Jean Vignot is a kind of local theory about the epistemological learning of particular sets of mathematical concepts. Not all, but some. The classical distinction that I also had the opportunity to mention in the panel the other day, the distinction between concept definition and concept image, which has been popularized by Shlomo Wiener and David Toll, but actually originated with Wiener and Hershkovich. Of course, the theory of didactical situations, which deals with the implemented teaching of mathematics by Guy Brousseau and colleagues, that has a learning focus. Even though it is about teaching, but it nevertheless has a learning focus. The APA theory, action, process, object, schema theory, deals with the formation of concepts on a Piagetian basis. I think that Ed Dubinsky might probably think that it is more than a medium-level theory, that it is in fact a grand theory of mathematical learning. The anthropological theory of didactics from Chevallard and colleagues deals with the construction of mathematics as a teaching subject and has an epistemological focus. So just yesterday I had the pleasure of listening to a lecture by Gershon Harel, whose work I have also read, about what he calls the duality, necessity, repeated reasoning. He doesn't call it a theory, but I think it may well warrant the term, at least a germ of a theory, and that has a learning and cognition focus. And now he's moving into trying to use this also as a basis for teaching. Allan Schoenfeld has spent years working on a theory on teaching in context, which particularly looks at what are the decisions that teachers make in action. So it is a more general theory than one that pertains to mathematics education, but it certainly has lots of examples coming from mathematics education. We can also discuss the extent to which realistic mathematics education from the Freudenthal Institute, which deals with the general mathematical epistemological framework for teaching mathematics. To what extent that is a theory, but I think it certainly contains lots of elements of what might be called a theoretical germs. The theory by Duval and others about semiotic registers that deal with different representations of mathematical concepts, and in particular the shifts between these representations, and see them, it's the theory of the fact that mathematical concepts cannot be approached apart from through the representation they are given. There's a German, sorry, a German approach, which I had to. Which has not really been made popular, but I think it's very interesting. It is the approach, the theoretical framework approach to what is called fundamental mathematical ideas, Grundvorstellungen, as it's called in German, and which on the basis of the classical German Stoffdidaktik tradition, so subject matter didactics, deals with the foundation of mathematical concepts, the basic mathematical concepts that can then further on be used as mathematical concepts for further work. But there are also, as I indicated, beginning to pop up ideas of mathematics education as research as an object, meta theories about mathematics education. Today, Michel Artigue gave a talk about the didactical engineering approach, which has been cultivated and developed in France throughout the years, and which is about putting French didactics to use in research and implementation and practice, based, of course, on the other French didactical theories, but which is a way of conceptualizing mathematics education research as at least a partial object. And then there are the people who have been advocating for years for seeing mathematics education as a design science. So mathematics education can be likened with engineering, social engineering, and what we are really after is to provide a basis for designing effective teaching and learning activities. And different people such as Erich Widmann, Paul Cobb, and Leshen Sriraman, and others have proposed to see mathematics education as a design science, and that is in fact then a grand theory, a grand level theory. The theoretical status of almost all the theories and theory germs about in and for mathematics education is extremely diverse, and it is often unclear. The same is true of what are the origins and backgrounds of these. How are they constituted? How can we discuss them? How can we look into them? But it's nevertheless still the case that the majority of theories and theory germs are primarily conceptual frameworks, many of which are inspired by philosophical considerations of different sorts. To an increasing extent, they are beginning to have empirical components. And some of the theories or theory germs are now, to an increasing extent, becoming tested empirically. But the interpretations or the conclusions arrived at in those empirical works are still mainly interpretive. We have to interpret what is happening in classrooms. We have to interpret what is happening in students' minds. We have to interpret what teachers are thinking and doing, etc. So there is no direct access to what really happens without making use of strong interpretations. Okay, we should then look at mathematics education research as it plays out today. What are then the actual roles in research, say research publications? Today, all research publications today contain a substantial theory section, where the theoretical frameworks are invoked and the theories used, etc., are being presented. But it's surprising. I've actually done this somewhat detailed study of this. I haven't published it because I think it may be problematic. But surprisingly often, the theories invoked in the beginning of a research paper do not really inform the actual research, let alone permeate it. Oftentimes, the theory is invoked to pay lip service or to be a legitimation, or sometimes even a declaration of membership of a community. I belong to the community of constructivists of this particular breed, etc. So it's surprising. If theories are as important as we want them to be, then they should permeate the research papers in which they are invoked. But more often than not, they don't. This is changing gradually, but I think it's still surprising. But beyond that, there are now specific and actual multiple roles in theories in mathematics education research. As to then again invoke Ed Silver and Patricia Herbst, theories do in fact sometimes serve as mediators between research problems and practices. Sometimes they just offer a terminology. We use some names to use, some terms to use, some notions to use, and that is oftentimes more or less what a theory offers. Sometimes they establish a perspective from which we can look at the mathematics education research we are doing. Is a chosen position. Sometimes, and again, to an increasing extent, this is happening in publications these days, they organize a set of specific observations and interpretations of phenomena that are singular but nevertheless related. And they try to put them into a more or less coherent whole. So that's an organizational work which does not create a theory, but which is a way of using theoretical approaches and theoretical frameworks to organize what we are seeing and how we can interpret it. And sometimes, of course, theories offer methodologies for the research we are conducting. For instance, we borrow theories from anthropology. There are ways of importing aspects of the ways in which anthropology is being conducted as a research domain that we can make use of in classroom studies, for example, in mathematics education. So now here comes my conclusion. The notion of theory is of vital importance in mathematics education research. It is something we must strive at creating. We must strive at building viable, well-founded theories. But the notion of theory is worryingly ill-defined, as I have tried to suggest. And most of the theories in mathematics education are worryingly ill-defined as well. I'm not saying that they are good or bad at all, I'm saying they are ill-defined. We don't really know too much about what they are about. And the constitution and the foundation of many theories and their cognates are unclear. We don't know where they come from and what their basis is and how they can be corroborated. And if we look at actual theories and try to find out what are their characteristics and what are their properties, these are often obscure. Okay, so this leaves us in a situation that is not sustainable. I think we cannot live with that in the long run. I realize that we are in a long-term process of shaping theories for our purposes, but we have not done enough, I think, to clarify the nature of what we are doing. So I would like to call for the mathematics education research, the community, to join forces in reaching common notions of theory and its cognates. What do we actually mean by these things? At least we ought to discuss them. And I also call on us to actually analyzing the nature, characteristics, status, properties, foundations, and roles of extant theories and theoretical constructs. Let's go do archaeology on these theories. Let's try to understand what they are about. Let's try to analyze them. Let's try to compare them, and perhaps also eventually criticize them. If we don't do that, then building and connecting theories will remain a futile endeavor. There is nothing as practical as a good theory. Thank you for your attention. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Ángela o Dr. Rafael.
Dr. Morgan, there are some questions in the chat.
I can imagine.
There is a question from Professor Arkavi and 2 or 3 more. Can you read it?
Let me
in the
see.
Chat.
Let me just see here. Okay, this is okay. Let me see the chat.
You have to click in the.
Yes, there are in the chat.
Yes.
There are 82 questions.
There is something written by Abraham Arkavi.
Okay.
Can you say something about the risk that theory went blind us?
Let me see where's Abraham's question. I can't find that. So would you mind repeating what Abraham asked me?
Yes. He said, can you say something about the risk that theory might blind us by those who adhere to a particular theory with ideological zeal, rather than considering theory as means, as tool for reflection, and which does not exclude others?
I'm sorry, it didn't come really clearly through. So yeah, I found Abraham's text. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree with Abraham,
Yes.
In particular, I agree that sometimes the rigid use of theories will prevent us from asking the right questions, because if we are forced to raise questions within a particular theoretical framework, there are significant parts of the world that we will not be able to see. So I think there's certainly a risk of us being blinded by theories, and Dick Lesh has even made the point that we are not really witnessing theory-driven research. We are witnessing ideology-driven research. I think that's going a bit too far, but I think there certainly is a danger. That should not prevent us from using theories, but it should make us very cautious and willing to discuss and analyze theories and compare them with other approaches. So we should not accept to be locked into the prison of a particular theory. Our field is not mature enough for that, as I see it.
Yeah, and so if you go down in the chat, there are 3 more questions.
Yes.
In English, they are written in English.
Yes, okay, let me see.
How to publish research that arrives in practice without having much knowledge about the theory. It is one of the questions.
I have difficulty finding it. Oh yes, I found it now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is a very, very important thing. I think we should be able to publish research that arises from praxis without initially having much knowledge about the theory. It is so that requires us to formulate and pose very pertinent and clear research questions. What is it that we want to understand? What is it that is biting or nagging or itching that we really want to come to grips with? And how can we identify ways of investigating these things? Sometimes we may make use of theories, but sometimes we may not. There are lots of fantastic, interesting research that is being published without having any theoretical background. It is more and more difficult these days, and in particular research that arises from praxis, and in particular if practice is of a local nature where we want to make a difference in the community we are working in, that may be more important than invoking the glossy theories from elsewhere. And so there's also a question. There's one question here that says there seems to be not to be consensus about mathematical education.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where do you stand? What would be your advice on which theory to understand for a novice in the field? My recommendation for a novice in the field would be to be brave and to follow Frank Lester's approach. First of all, identify the phenomena you would want to study and the questions you would want to ask. Then see how you can create, you yourself as a novice researcher can try to create a research framework, possibly with the help of others. But be brave and dare to see things with your own eyes and not just follow what others want you to do. And if you are a young researcher in the field, you will have friends and colleagues and mentors that may help you doing this. In particular, if they don't try to force you into doing particular things and using particular theories that the researcher, that your supervisor loves him or herself. But if you have a supervisor that is willing to allow you to be brave and daring, then you are more likely to be able to produce something of value than if you buy into lots of well-defined theories.
And there are two more.
Yeah. Let me see. Can I find that?
¿Cómo vamos de tiempo, Rafael?
Todavía. Él era hasta las 3:45.
So what is it? So what there's one here. Sometimes we have strange situations related to theory. For example, in textbooks, the analysis articles present a theoretical framework, describe an object, proportionality, fractions, etc., present constructs or measurable characteristics of that object, and proceed to analyze the text. So they do not make implicit a theory. On the other hand, some articles with Apers, Tad, and others, what do we do if we are in a field where theories are not explicit and you need a theory to research in this field? I'm not sure that you need a research, that you need a theory in a field where there is no theory. You may contribute to creating the germs of such a theory. It is not the case that every single phenomenon and every single question in mathematics education that is of significance can be covered by a theory. Most of the time, this is not the case. And this is why this is what also makes our field so promising, that we can actually all contribute to extending the boundaries of our current knowledge. We should not accept, I think, to be locked into these theories that are present. So let me give you a metaphor. It is a very bad idea to try to measure gravitation by reading a thermometer. If you actually do that, you will get a number.
Yeah.
You will get a number, but this number may not or will not have anything to do with gravitation. In the same way, if you buy into a theory that does not cover and purport to cover what you're looking at, then you will have no use of the theory. It will be damaging to your work instead of helpful. So again, be brave.
Yeah. And there is just time for one more question, the last one there.
Which one, about the pandemic?
Yeah, about the pandemic, yes.
So it says, we can affirm that the pandemic situation reveals the unsustainability of research in mathematics education today.
Mm-hmm.
But does it make possible a prompt transformation of the mathematics classroom, of our practice, of the objectives, and undergraduate and postgraduate programs in mathematics teaching? I would say not prompt, but it certainly does offer avenues. And in particular, it offers a platform in which we have to think from scratch in many respects. Thinking from scratch does not mean that we are not in a position to use what we can use, but it requires us to begin to, what are the fundamentals? What is mathematics education actually basically about? And how can we tell that someone has learned mathematics to a satisfactory degree? That will, what are the assessment instruments we can make use of? And the pandemic situation requires us to rethink this, not of course by discarding everything we did in the past, but by insisting on thinking on the important questions with whatever means we have. And I think there are lots of things that have been past traditions that need not be future traditions as well. But there is no simple way of transforming the current situation into that situation. But it opens avenues for thinking and reconsidering what we have been doing in the past.
It's okay. Thank you very much for your interesting and very deep talk. Congratulations. It was a very, very interesting. Muchas gracias por su conferencia, Dr. Nissen, muy profunda e interesante.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias al doctor Mogens Allan Niss por su presentación y al doctor Rafael Sánchez por su moderación de este espacio.